Is that? Oh my God. It is. Who is that with her? A beat. That's Kang. Minute J. Kang. Silence fell like a blade. Wait. There. The murmurs didn't just grow louder, they changed. Recognition rippled outward. Then fear. Then the slow, dawning comprehension that something far bigger than a wedding entrance had just arrived. At the top of the steps, Dominic went perfectly still. For half a second, the mask slipped. Shock flickered across his face, sharp, unguarded. Then it was gone. Smoothed away beneath a polished smile that didn't reach his eyes. When they reached the terrace, he descended 2 steps to meet them, arms spread wide in a gesture of welcome that was pure theatre. The gracious host. The unbothered groom. Alana, he said smoothly. I'm surprised. She met his gaze without hesitation. Up close, she could see the fine lines branching from the corners of his eyes. The faint silver threading his dark hair where his barber had tried, and failed, to disguise it. Time had touched him. Time touched everyone. You shouldn't be, she replied evenly. You invited me. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Then his gaze shifted to Minute J. And something changed. Not jealousy. Assessment. Calculation. The quiet recalibration of a man realizing the board in front of him was not the one he thought he'd set. And you must be? Dominic extended his hand, the picture of civility. Minute J looked at it. Then at him. And did not take it. Before we continue. Hey, if you've enjoyed even a little of what I share here, it would mean the world to me if you hit subscribe. Every single subscription brings me closer to 1,000, and honestly, I can't do it without you. Chapter 1. The Invitation. 5 years. For 5 years, Alana Brooks had rebuilt herself from the ashes of a marriage that had nearly destroyed her. Brick by ruthless brick. Scar by invisible scar. She had learned to breathe without the weight of someone else's expectations crushing her ribcage. She had learned to speak without measuring every word against the silent judgment in a man's eyes. She had learned, slowly and painfully, to trust her own reflection again. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. Heavy cream cardstock. Gold foil lettering so bright it hurt to look at directly. Embossed edges sharp enough to draw blood if you weren't careful. The kind of invitation that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The kind that announced its importance before you even opened the envelope. Dominic DeLuca and Isabella Moretti request the honor of your presence. Alana read it twice. Then once more, slower this time, letting each word sink in like stones into still water. Creating ripples. Disturbing the careful peace she had cultivated. Dominic hadn't just invited her to his wedding. He had couriered it. Hand-delivered by a man in a black suit, who had waited at her building's front desk until she signed for it. Who had watched her sign with cold, assessing eyes that reported back to someone. Probably Dominic himself. That wasn't an invitation. That was a message. Behind her, the penthouse was silent. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Chicago skyline in silver twilight. The city spread out below like a kingdom made of light and shadow. The skyline she had once only dreamed of seeing from this height. The city that glittered, unaware that its most powerful crime family had just extended what looked like an olive branch but felt more like a knife, blade first, wrapped in expensive paper. You're holding it like it offended you. The voice came from the shadows near the balcony. Low. Controlled. Smooth as poured ink over silk. The kind of voice that could order an execution or recite poetry with the same dangerous calm. Alana didn't turn. She knew that voice better than her own heartbeat now. Had learned to read its subtle shifts, the microscopic changes in tone that meant danger, calculation, or the rare moments of genuine warmth reserved only for her. It did, she said evenly. A pause. Then the quiet sound of expensive shoes crossing marble. Italian leather. Custom-made. The kind of details that separated men who pretended to have power from men who actually held it in their fists. Minute J. Kang stopped behind her. Close enough that she could feel his presence like a change in atmospheric pressure. Close enough that his cologne, cedar and something darker, more complex, reached her. But he didn't touch her. He rarely touched her without intention, without purpose. Every contact was a choice, never a casual gesture. What does he want? Minute J asked. Not jealous. Not threatened. Just calculating. Running probabilities and motivations through that sharp, tactical mind of his. The same mind that had built an empire while remaining invisible to everyone who didn't need to know his name. Alana finally turned and handed him the invitation. Their fingers brushed, a spark of contact that still, after 2 years of marriage, sent electricity up her arm. His eyes, dark and unreadable as deep water, scanned the card once. His expression didn't change. It never did. Minute J. Kang had learned to control his face before most children learned to read. It was a survival skill in his world. In their world now. Dominic De Luca was a capo in the Italian syndicate that controlled the West Side, a man who had once promised Alana forever before slowly, methodically choking the life out of her independence. Who had loved her the way collectors loved butterflies, pinned and mounted, beautiful and dead. Minute J. Kang ruled something far older. Far quieter. And far more lethal. Chicago called him a businessman. Tech investments and real estate portfolios. Charity galas and hospital wings with his name on them. Interpol called him a ghost, a phantom they could never quite catch, never quite prove existed beyond rumors and whispered names in dark rooms. Seoul called him heir to an empire built on blood and silence that stretched back 3 generations, roots sunk deep into Korean soil before spreading like underground networks across the Pacific. He wants to humiliate me, Alana said calmly, in front of every family in the city. Dominic's new bride was the daughter of a rival capo, Marco Moretti's youngest, his precious jewel. The wedding wouldn't just be romantic pageantry and false smiles. It would be political theater. A consolidation of power. An announcement that the De Luca and Moretti families were unified now, stronger together, a force to be reckoned with. Power displayed like jewelry under ballroom lights. Alana Brooks. The ex-wife who couldn't handle the lifestyle. The woman who walked away. The narrative Dominic had carefully fed to the underworld, letting it spread like poison through whispered conversations and knowing looks. Painting himself as the wronged party, the dedicated man whose wife had been too weak for their world. It was a lie. But it was a lie that had taken root. Minute J looked at her. Really looked at her, with those eyes that saw through walls and lies and carefully constructed facades. Eyes that had seen her at her worst, broken and hollow-eyed in the weeks after she'd left Dominic, and had never once looked at her with pity. You didn't walk away, he said quietly. You survived. His words landed differently than anyone else's ever had. Because he knew. He knew about the nights Dominic locked her in penthouse silence, while negotiating deals with men who looked at her like an accessory. A decoration. Something pretty to prove the man's success, but never to be consulted, never to have opinions that mattered. He knew about the bruised pride that left no visible marks. The isolation. The way Dominic's affection had always come with strings attached. With ownership. With the unspoken price tag of her complete surrender. What will you do? Minute J asked. Alana inhaled slowly, feeling her lungs expand against her ribs. Breathing had become a conscious act again in recent weeks, ever since word had started filtering through the network that Dominic was getting married. That he was moving on. That he was, apparently, ready to parade his new life in front of everyone. If I don't go, he wins. And if you do? She met her husband's dark, unreadable gaze. Found strength there, the way she always did. Not because he made her strong, but because he reminded her that she already was. Then I don't go alone. Silence stretched between them. Electric. Strategic. The air itself seemed to thicken with possibility and danger. Minute J stepped closer now. Close enough that she could feel his warmth without contact, could see the subtle shift in his expression. Not quite a smile, not quite approval, but something calculating and dark that sent heat through her veins. You understand what that means, he murmured. Not a question. A statement. An acknowledgement of the chess game they were entering. Dominic De Luca had no idea Alana's rebound marriage wasn't to some quiet financier with soft hands and softer spine. No idea she had married into the Korean underworld. No idea that the Kang syndicate and the De Luca family had been circling each other in cold detent for years, 2 predators who hadn't yet decided if the other's territory was worth the bloodshed. If she walked into that wedding on Minute J's arm, it wouldn't just be personal. It would be a declaration. A shift in the delicate balance of power that kept Chicago's underworld from tearing itself apart. A provocation that could be read as weakness or strength depending on how they played it. It would be war, potentially. Or it would be the move that finally established them as equals to the Italian families who still thought of the Kang syndicate as foreign interlopers, dangerous but ultimately not true Chicago blood. Alana's heart pounded. Not from fear. She had lived with fear for too long to mistake it for anything else. This was different. This was something darker. Something that tasted like power on her tongue. "I'm done hiding," she said. For the first time, Minute J's mouth curved, just slightly. Not a smile, exactly. More like a promise. An acknowledgement between predators who had just decided to hunt together. "Then we'll attend." He stepped back, already mentally arranging security protocols, optics, timing. She could see him working through scenarios, calculating angles and responses. This was what he did. This was who he was. A man who thought 12 moves ahead while appearing not to think at all. Dominic had sent an invitation expecting shame. Expecting her to either stay away or arrive defeated, a ghost of her former self, proof of his narrative. He was about to receive a war banner instead. Alana looked back down at the gold lettering, at the carefully chosen words that were meant to wound. 5 years ago, Dominic had called her weak. Had made her believe it. Had convinced her that leaving him would mean becoming nothing. Tonight, she felt something entirely different. Powerful. And somewhere across the city, in a mansion that had once felt like a prison, a groom was celebrating a wedding he had just turned into a battlefield. He just didn't know it yet. Chapter TWO Ghosts and Empires. The memory came uninvited, the way they always did. 7 years ago, Alana had walked into Dominic DeLuca's world wearing a borrowed dress and her grandmother's pearls. She'd been 23, fresh out of graduate school with an art history degree and enough student debt to crush her, working as a junior curator at a gallery that paid barely enough to cover her studio apartment in a neighborhood where gunshots were as common as car alarms. Dominic had been 30, already a rising star in his father's organization, charming and dangerous in a tailored suit that probably cost more than her annual salary. He'd come to the gallery opening with an older capo, there to make an appearance, to be seen supporting the arts. But his eyes had found her across the room, and everything had shifted. He'd courted her with flowers and 5-star restaurants, with attention that felt like sunlight after years of being invisible. He'd listened when she talked about Caravaggio's use of shadow, about the way Renaissance artists embedded secret meanings in their work. He'd made her feel brilliant, special, seen. She'd ignored the warning signs. The way he always ordered for her at restaurants. The subtle criticism dressed as concern. The friends who slowly stopped calling after he'd made comments about how they weren't good enough for her anymore. The job opportunity at the Art Institute that he'd convinced her to turn down because the hours would be inconvenient for his schedule. By the time she'd realized she was in a cage, the door had already locked behind her. "You're thinking about him." Minute J's voice pulled her back to the present. They were in his study now, the invitation lying on his desk like evidence at a crime scene. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 2 walls, filled with volumes in Korean, English, Mandarin. Art books, philosophy, strategic theory. A man who understood that power came from knowledge as much as from violence. Alana turned from the window where she'd been staring at the city without seeing it. Minute J sat in a leather chair, watching her with that unnerving patience of his. He could wait forever when he needed to. Had mastered the art of silence in ways that made people desperate to fill it. "Not thinking about him," she said. "Thinking about who I was then." "And who are you now?" The question hung in the air between them. Who was she now? Not the naive girl who'd fallen for Dominic's charm. Not the broken woman who'd left him 3 years ago with nothing but the clothes on her back and a soul that felt shredded. But not quite the woman she wanted to be either. Still becoming. Still building. "I'm working on it." Minute J stood, moving toward her with that predatory grace that never failed to make her hyper-aware of him. He stopped just close enough to crowd her space without quite touching. Close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "You are Alana Kang," he said. "My wife. My partner." A woman who rebuilt herself from ashes, while men like Dominic DeLuca were still playing with matches. His hand came up, fingertips barely grazing her jawline. The touch was electric, deliberate. Permission asked and granted in the space of a heartbeat. You are not his ghost. You never were. Something in her chest cracked open. Not breaking. Blooming. She'd spent 2 years married to this man, and he still surprised her. Still saw through her in ways that should have terrified her, but instead felt like coming home to a place she'd never known existed. How did we get here? She asked. She hadn't meant to ask it out loud, but the question escaped anyway. How had a broken ex-wife ended up married to one of the most dangerous men in Chicago's underground? How had she gone from one empire to another, from one powerful man to someone infinitely more powerful? Minute J's mouth curved into something that might have been a smile on another man's face. On him, it looked like a secret. You walked into my gallery. She remembered. God, she remembered. 18 months after leaving Dominic, she'd been scraping together a life from the wreckage. A friend had gotten her a job at a small gallery in Pilsen, nothing glamorous, but it was hers. Her expertise. Her domain. The owner had connections to collectors, one of whom was Minute J. Kang. He'd come to view a Joseon dynasty painting, 500 years old, ink on silk, worth more than most houses. She'd been the one to authenticate it, to explain its provenance, its significance. She'd expected another rich collector, someone who bought art as investment, as status symbol. Instead, she'd found a man who understood the painting's poetry, who'd stood in front of it for 20 minutes without speaking, just looking. Really looking, the way artists looked at art. The way she looked at it. When he'd finally spoken, it had been in Korean, quoting the artist's inscription. She hadn't understood the words, but she'd understood the reverence in his voice. The same reverence she felt for beauty that survived centuries. You knew the artist's name without checking your notes, Minute J said now, his voice soft with memory. You knew the period, the style, the historical context. But more than that, you loved it. He'd bought the painting. Then he'd asked her to dinner. Not the way Dominic had, all flash and overwhelming charm. Quiet. Simple. Would you have dinner with me? Not a command dressed as a question. An actual question, one she could refuse without consequence. She'd said yes. I didn't know who you were then, she said. Not really. I know. That's why I asked. The memory shifted between them, comfortable and charged at once. Those first months had been careful. Dinners that never assumed more. Conversations that ranged from art to philosophy to the small, quiet truths people usually kept hidden. He'd never asked about her marriage, about why she lived in a studio apartment and worked for a fraction of what her expertise should earn. He'd simply waited. Let her offer the information in her own time. Let her trust him by degrees. When she'd finally told him about Dominic, not everything, but enough, he'd listened without judgment, without trying to fix her or save her. He'd just listened. And then he'd said something that had changed everything. Men who need to break women are already broken themselves. 6 months later, he'd proposed. Not with a ring and flowers and a bended knee. With a conversation about what marriage could be between equals. About partnership and protection and the choice to build something together. I don't need to possess you. I don't need to own you. I need you to choose me, every day, knowing exactly who I am and what I'm capable of. She'd chosen him. Not because he was powerful, though he was. Not because he was wealthy, though he was that too. But because he saw her as a person, complete and complex and capable. Because he understood that love wasn't ownership. Because he'd offered her freedom inside the safety of his empire. Because with him, she'd finally learned to breathe. The wedding is in 5 days, Minute J said, bringing her back to the present. 5 days. Not much time to prepare for war dressed as a party. What happens if this goes wrong? She asked. It was the fear she'd been avoiding, the question that lurked beneath her determination. What if showing up with Minute J didn't establish their power, but instead exposed vulnerability? What if Dominic used it as an excuse to destabilize the tentative peace between their organizations? What if people died because she'd wanted to prove she wasn't weak? Nothing goes wrong, Minute J said. We control the narrative. We show strength, not aggression. We remind everyone that you are not someone to be dismissed or pitied. His confidence should have been reassuring. But Alana knew the underworld better now than she had as Dominic's wife. Knew that confidence could be just another word for hubris. That even the most careful plans could unravel with one wrong move. Dominic won't let this go unanswered. Good, Minute J said, steel entering his voice. Let him answer. Let him show everyone exactly who he is when he's threatened. There was steel in Minute J's voice now, the coldness that reminded her he hadn't built an empire by being gentle. He was patient, yes, strategic. But when pushed, he pushed back with devastating force. The study door opened. Jun, Minute J's right hand, stepped inside without knocking. That alone told Alana this was important. Jun was in his 40s, compact and efficient, with scars that told stories he never shared. He'd been with Minute J for 15 years, loyal in a way that transcended employment. We have movement, Jun said without preamble. DeLuca made calls tonight. 6 different families. He's shoring up support. Minute J didn't move, but something in the room's atmosphere shifted. Became sharper, more dangerous. For what? That's the question. Could be normal wedding politics. Could be something else. Jun's eyes flicked to Alana, then back to Minute J. There was a question in that look. Should we discuss this in front of her? It was a courtesy that Jun always extended, a recognition that she might not want to be involved in the violent particulars of their world. But she was involved. Had been since the moment Dominic's invitation arrived. Maybe since the moment she'd said I do to a man who ran an empire built on blood. I want to hear it, she said. Jun nodded, pulling a small tablet from his jacket. He brought up a series of photos, surveillance shots, dark and grainy but clear enough. Dominic meeting with various men in expensive suits. Handshakes and serious faces. Power brokering in expensive restaurants and private clubs. Marco Moretti, obviously. That's his future father-in-law. Santino Rossi. The Castellanos. Even reached out to Yuri Volkov, which is interesting because the Russians usually stay out of Italian politics. Minute J studied the photos with the focus of a surgeon examining an X-ray. Looking for the fracture, the weakness, the thing that would reveal the true shape of the threat. He's building a coalition, Minute J said. Against us. The question came from Alana, and both men looked at her. Jun with surprise, Minute J with something that might have been pride. Possibly, Jun said. Or he's just making sure everyone knows he's strong. Could be the wedding has him paranoid. Could be he found out you're attending and wants backup. How would he know that? Jun's expression was carefully neutral. Someone in his organization knows someone in ours. Or someone in ours told someone in his. Information leaks. It's inevitable. Alana felt cold. She'd known this, of course. Had known that in their world, secrets were currency and everyone was always selling. But knowing it abstractly was different from knowing it specifically. Someone had told Dominic she was coming. Had given him time to prepare, to plan, to build defenses. We use it, Minute J said, his voice calm, decided. He looked at June, let it leak that we are bringing security. Substantial security. Make it visible enough that people notice, not so much that it looks like we are starting a war. Understood. And reach out to the Volkovs. If Dominic's trying to pull the Russians into Italian politics, Yuri should know that we have questions about that. Jun smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. The Volkovs and the Kang Syndicate had an understanding, mutual respect built on mutual danger. If Dominic was trying to disrupt that balance, it would backfire spectacularly. Anything else? Find out who leaked that we are attending. I want to know if it was careless or intentional. Jun nodded and left as quietly as he'd arrived. The door closed, and silence filled the study again. But it was a different silence now. Charged with strategy and impending confrontation. Alana moved to the desk, picked up the invitation again. The gold lettering seemed to mock her. All this turmoil, all this potential violence, because her ex-husband had wanted to show off his new life. Except it wasn't that simple. It never was in their world. Nothing was ever just personal. Every action rippled outward, creating waves that capsized boats miles away. Tell me about the first time he hurt you, Minute J said quietly. The question was quiet, but it hit like a physical blow. She turned to look at him, found him watching her with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable but wasn't. He asked because he wanted to understand, not because he wanted ammunition. The difference mattered. It wasn't violent. Not physically. I know. Tell me anyway. Alana set the invitation down, wrapped her arms around herself. The memory was still sharp despite the years. 6 months after we got married, the Art Institute offered me a job. Not the one he'd convinced me to turn down before. A better one. Associate curator. It was everything I'd wanted. Dream position. Good salary. Respect. She could still remember the joy she'd felt opening that email. The disbelief that they'd chosen her, that she'd made it. She'd practically floated home to tell Dominic, had been planning how to celebrate, already imagining her new office, her new responsibilities. I told him over dinner. I was so excited. And he smiled, said congratulations, ordered champagne. We toasted. He seemed happy for me. But 2 days later, I got a call. The job offer was being rescinded. They apologized, said there had been a budget issue, that they had to restructure the position. It was very sorry, very professional, very final. She'd cried for hours. Had thought it was her fault somehow, that she wasn't good enough, that she'd done something wrong in the interview process. Dominic had been so comforting. Held me while I cried. Told me it was their loss. That I was too good for them anyway. That I didn't need to work. That he made enough for both of us. That my job was to be his wife, and wasn't that more important than some museum position? The bitterness in her voice surprised her. Even now, years later, the betrayal stung. I believed him. I actually believed him. It took me 2 years to find out he'd called in a favor. Had someone at the Institute cancel the offer. He'd sabotaged me, then comforted me for the loss he'd caused. Minute J's expression hadn't changed, but his hands had curled into fists. Controlled violence, leashed but present. That was the first time. The first time I realized it, yes. But looking back, there were smaller things before. Friendships he subtly discouraged. Opinions he dismissed. Ways he made me feel stupid for liking things he didn't like. Death by 1,000 cuts. None of them big enough to call abuse. All of them adding up to a prison I didn't recognize until I was already locked inside. And when did you recognize it? The million-dollar question. When had she finally seen what was right in front of her? When had the scales fallen from her eyes? A year before I left. We were at a party, one of his father's events. Political fundraiser or something. I was talking to another wife, someone who'd complimented my dress. We were just chatting, harmless. And Dominic came over, put his hand on my lower back. Everyone thought it was affectionate. But I could feel his fingers digging in. Hard enough to bruise. She could still feel it sometimes, that pressure. The physical reminder that she belonged to him, that she was his to control. Later, in the car, he told me I'd embarrassed him. That I'd been too loud, too friendly, too familiar with someone who wasn't important enough to warrant my time. He didn't yell. He never yelled. He just explained, very calmly, how I'd failed to represent him properly. How I needed to be better. How disappointed he was. The tears came now, unexpected. She'd thought she was done crying over Dominic DeLuca. Thought she'd processed this, dealt with it, moved past it. But apparently some wounds never fully closed. And I apologized. God, I apologized to him. For existing wrong. For breathing wrong. For being too much of myself instead of enough of his accessory. Minute J crossed to her then, pulled her into his arms with a gentleness that contradicted everything his reputation suggested. He didn't tell her not to cry. Didn't try to fix it or minimize it. Just held her while she shook, while the old pain worked its way out. That's why you left, he said. Not a question. That's when I knew I had to. Even if it meant being poor again. Even if it meant being alone. I couldn't be that person anymore. The one who apologized for existing. You're not alone. 3 words. Simple. But they meant everything. She wasn't alone anymore. Hadn't been for 2 years. And in 5 days, she was going to walk into Dominic's wedding and remind him, remind everyone, that she'd survived him. More than survived. Thrived. I want to destroy him, she said quietly. The admission surprised her even as she said it. She'd never let herself want that before. Had tried to take the high road, to be the bigger person, to just move on and live well as the best revenge. But she was tired of being the bigger person. Tired of letting him spread lies about her while she stayed silent. Tired of knowing he was out there telling people she'd been weak, that she'd failed, that she hadn't been woman enough to handle his world. I want him to know what he lost. I want him to regret every lie he told. I want him to understand that I didn't leave because I was weak. I left because he was. Minute J pulled back just enough to look at her face. His eyes were dark, intense, and in them she saw recognition, understanding. And beneath that, something that looked almost like pride. Then we'll make sure he knows, he said. All of it. It was a promise and a threat. And standing in that study, surrounded by books and power and the man who'd helped her rebuild herself, Alana felt something shift inside her. A click, like a safety being released. Like a weapon being loaded. Dominic DeLuca had invited her to his wedding expecting a ghost. He was going to get a reckoning instead. Chapter 2: Preparations and Predators. The dress arrived 2 days before the wedding. Alana opened the box in her dressing room, the space Minute J had given her when she'd moved in, all natural light and clean lines, nothing like the oppressive luxury of Dominic's house where every surface had screamed money but none of it had felt like home. The fabric was midnight blue silk, so dark it looked black until the light hit it and revealed depths of color like the ocean at night. The cut was simple, elegant, devastating. It would skim her body without clinging, suggest without revealing, command attention without begging for it. It was perfect. He has good taste. Alana turned to find Minute J leaning in the doorway, watching her with that unreadable expression that somehow still communicated volumes. She'd learned to read the microscopic shifts, the slight softening around his eyes that meant approval, the barely there curve of his mouth that meant he was pleased. You chose this. I gave parameters to someone who understands these things better than I do. But yes, I approved it. Of course he had. Minute J left nothing to chance, especially not when it came to optics and power dynamics. This dress wasn't just beautiful. It was armor. A statement. She lifted it from the box, held it against herself, watching in the mirror as the fabric transformed her reflection. The woman looking back at her wasn't the girl who'd married Dominic 7 years ago. Wasn't even the broken woman who'd left him 3 years ago. This woman looked dangerous. When we walk in, Minute J said, moving into the room, everyone will be watching. Dominic will have prepared his people for our arrival, but preparation and reality are different things. He came to stand behind her, not touching, just present in the mirror's reflection. A study in contrasts, her in midnight blue, him in the sharp lines of his tailored suit. He'll try to control the narrative, Minute J continued. Make our presence seem expected, planned, invited. He'll play the gracious ex-husband, the bigger man. He'll try to make you small. And what do? You exist. You don't shrink. You don't apologize. You don't explain. You simply are, and let them wonder. His hand came to rest on her shoulder, warm through the silk of her robe. The touch was light but deliberate, as all his touches were. The moment we step inside, you are not his ex-wife. You are my wife. My partner. A woman who belongs at my side by choice, not by circumstance. Alana met his eyes in the mirror. And if he tries to speak to me privately, he won't. The certainty in Minute J's voice should have been comforting. Instead, it sent a chill down her spine. Not fear. Something else. The recognition that her husband was a man who made things happen, or prevented them from happening, through means she didn't always want to examine too closely. Jun will be with us, Minute J continued, along with 6 others. They'll be discreet, but visible. A reminder that we don't come alone, that we don't come unprepared. You're bringing an army to a wedding. I'm bringing appropriate security to a political event hosted by a man who has already demonstrated he cannot be trusted. The distinction mattered. In their world, everything was language and symbol. 8 men could be a security detail or a threat depending on how you framed it. Minute J was framing it as the former, while ensuring everyone understood it could become the latter. What about gifts? Alana asked. Do we bring something? Minute J's mouth curved into something that might have been amusement on a less controlled face. We are the gift. Our presence is the statement. Anything else would be trying too hard. He was right. Of course. Showing up was enough. Showing up together, powerful and united, was more than enough. It was everything. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. It was the first time she'd said it out loud. The fear that had been building since the invitation arrived, growing with each day that brought them closer to the wedding. Not fear of Dominic himself. She'd stopped being afraid of him the moment she'd walked out of his house with nothing but her dignity. But fear of what this meant. What it could trigger. What dominoes might fall. Good, Minute J said. Fear keeps you sharp. It's not the fear that's the problem. It's what you do with it. He turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. You can channel it into power. Into presence. Into the reminder that you are a woman who survived something that should have broken you, and came out stronger on the other side. His fingers traced the line of her jaw, tilted her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. Or, he said, voice dropping lower, if it becomes too much, if at any point you want to leave, we leave. No questions. No judgment. Your comfort matters more than any statement we could make. This was why she'd married him. Not the power or the wealth or the protection, though all of those mattered. But this, the recognition that she was a person with limits and boundaries and the right to enforce them. The understanding that strength didn't mean never retreating, never needing support. I won't want to leave, she said. Not until we've made our point. And what point is that? She smiled, and it wasn't a kind expression. That Alana Brooks DeLuca is dead. That woman let herself be diminished. But Alana Kang. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin. Alana Kang is very much alive. And she doesn't bend for anyone. Minute J's eyes darkened with something that looked like pride and desire mixed together. He leaned in, pressed a kiss to her forehead that felt like a benediction. Or a battle cry. Then let's give them something to remember. The next 2 days passed in careful preparation. Jun coordinated security, running backgrounds on every guest, mapping exits and sightlines, preparing for contingencies that ranged from social embarrassment to actual violence. The Rossi family will be there, Jun reported during one of their strategy sessions. Santino's been making noise about wanting to expand into the north side. That's our territory. Let him make noise, Minute J said calmly. Noise is all it is unless he backs it with action. He might see the wedding as an opportunity. All the families together, everyone showing their allegiances. If Dominic's building a coalition, Rossi could use it to pressure us. Then we make it clear that pressure goes both ways. Alana listened to these conversations, learning the chess game of their world. Every wedding wasn't just a celebration. Every funeral wasn't just grief. Every public gathering was an opportunity for subtle power plays, alliance building, message sending. She'd known this intellectually when she was married to Dominic. But she'd never been included in the strategy before. Had never been treated as a player rather than a piece. The difference was intoxicating. The night before the wedding, Alana couldn't sleep. She stood at the bedroom window, looking out at the city, imagining Dominic in his own house doing the same thing. Was he thinking about her? About what it would mean to see her again? Did he regret inviting her, now that he knew she was actually coming? Or was he so secure in his own narrative that he genuinely believed she would arrive defeated, a cautionary tale for other women who might think about leaving powerful men? You're building scenarios. Minute J's voice came from the bed, where she'd thought he was asleep. But of course he wasn't. He rarely slept deeply, a habit from years of staying alert to danger. I can't stop thinking about tomorrow. Come here. She turned, found him propped up on one elbow, watching her with dark eyes. The moonlight through the windows painted him in silver and shadow, beautiful in the way predators were beautiful. Dangerous and elegant and utterly compelling. She crossed to the bed, slid under the covers. Minute J pulled her against him, his body warm and solid behind hers. His arm came around her waist, holding her close. Tell me what you're afraid of, he murmured against her hair. That I'll see him and feel small again. That all the work I've done, all the strength I've built, will just evaporate when I look into his eyes. It won't. How do you know? Because you're not the same woman who left him. That woman was breaking free. You're already free. There's a difference. His hand splayed across her stomach, grounding her. This was real. This solid presence at her back, this chosen partnership. Not the hollow performance her marriage to Dominic had been. "What if he tries to hurt you?" she asked. "What if using me to make a statement puts you in danger? Then he'll discover that some dangers are best left undisturbed." There was no bravado in Minute J's voice. Just statement of fact. He'd built his empire by being smarter, more patient, more willing to wait for the perfect moment than his enemies. Dominic was impulsive, emotional, reactive. Minute J was none of those things. "I need you to promise me something," Alana said. "What?" "That if things go wrong tomorrow, if it turns into something dangerous, you'll prioritize your safety over making a point." She felt him go still behind her. Then his arm tightened around her waist. "My safety and yours are the same thing. Where you're in danger, I'm in danger. That's what it means to be partners." Minute J. "No." His voice was gentle but implacable. "You don't get to ask me to value my life above yours. That's not how this works. We stand together or we don't stand at all." She turned in his arms to face him, found his expression serious in the moonlight. This man who'd killed people, she didn't know how many, didn't want to know, looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his dangerous world. "I love you," she said. It wasn't the first time she'd said it. But it felt different tonight, weighted with tomorrow's uncertainty. A declaration and a promise. Minute J's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "I know," he said. "I love you too. That's why tomorrow matters. Not because of Dominic. Because of you. Because you deserve to close that chapter completely. To show him and everyone else that you're not a victim of your past. You're the architect of your future." He kissed her then, slow and deep, the kind of kiss that erased thought and worry and left only sensation. Only the present moment. Only this bed, this man, this life she'd chosen. When they finally pulled apart, Alana felt steadier. Grounded. Ready. Tomorrow, she would walk into Dominic's wedding wearing midnight blue silk and Minute J's ring and her own hard-won confidence. Tomorrow, she would remind everyone who'd written her off that she was far from finished. Tomorrow, the ghost would become a reckoning. Chapter 4. The performance begins. The DeLuca estate glowed like Versailles dipped in sin. Alana watched it approach through the car window, her stomach tight with anticipation and something darker. The mansion rose from manicured grounds like a monument to excess. Crystal chandeliers visible through tall windows. Imported roses lining the circular drive. Armed men in tailored tuxedos pretending to be ushers, checking names against lists, their jackets cut to hide the bulge of weapons. Every Mafia family within 3 states was present. She could see their cars, Maseratis and Bentleys and blacked-out SUVs that screamed money and danger in equal measure. "Last chance to change your mind," Minute J said quietly. She turned to look at him. He sat beside her in the back seat, perfectly still, perfectly composed. His suit was charcoal grey, cut so precisely it looked painted on. No jewelry except his watch, understated, expensive, the kind of detail people who knew about these things would notice and respect. "Not a chance," she said. His mouth curved slightly. Approval. Jun sat in the front passenger seat, speaking quietly into his phone in Korean. Confirming positions, she assumed. Making sure their people were in place. Behind them, 2 more SUVs followed at a careful distance. Visible but not aggressive. A reminder. The car slowed as they approached the entrance. Alana could see other guests arriving, being greeted by ushers, moving into the house through doors thrown wide to reveal glimpses of opulence beyond. And there, at the top of the steps, she saw him. Dominic. He stood greeting arrivals with the practiced charm she remembered too well. Tall and athletic, sandy blonde hair perfectly styled, smile that could sell anything to anyone. He wore arrogance like cologne, expensive and overwhelming. She watched him laugh at something a guest said, clapped the man on the shoulder like they were old friends. Watched him kiss the cheeks of arriving women, his hand lingering on lower backs just a second too long. Always touching. Always claiming space. Some things never changed. Ready? Minute J asked. Alana took a breath. Released it. Straightened her spine. Ready. The car rolled to a stop at the end of the drive. She could see heads turning, attention shifting. This wasn't on the schedule. This was something unexpected. Jun stepped out first. Then two of their men from the following vehicles, moving to flank the car with professional efficiency, creating a corridor of safety. Minute J exited his side, straightened his jacket, and moved around to her door. When he opened it, when she placed her hand in his and stepped out onto the pavement, she heard it. The shift. Gasps traveling the crowd in whispers, turning heads into stares. The midnight blue silk moved like water around her. She'd worn her hair up, exposing her neck and shoulders, making no attempt to hide. Her grandmother's diamond earrings, the only jewelry Dominic hadn't been able to take from her, caught the light. Simple. Elegant. Enough. Minute J offered her his arm. She took it, felt his strength through the fabric of his suit. Solid. Steady. Real. They walked up the stone path together. Not rushed. Not hesitant. Simply walking, as if they had every right to be here. Which they did. Alana could feel eyes on her like physical pressure. Hear the whispers starting. Incredulous, speculative, sharp with judgment and fascination. Is that? Oh my God. It is. Who is that with her? That's Kang. Minute J. Kang. Wait. There. The murmurs turned into something else entirely. Recognition. Fear. Dawning comprehension. At the top of the steps, Dominic had gone still. She could see the exact moment he registered who was approaching. The shock that broke through his practiced composure. The flash of something in his eyes. Disbelief, anger, and underneath it all, the thing he'd never admit to feeling. Uncertainty. He recovered quickly. She'd give him that. The shock smoothed away, replaced by a smile that didn't reach his eyes. When they reached the terrace, he stepped forward, arms spread in a gesture of welcome that was pure performance. Alana, he greeted smoothly. I'm surprised. She met his eyes without flinching. Up close, she could see the fine lines starting at the corners. The hint of grey at his temples that his barber had tried to blend away. He was aging. Everyone aged. But she'd built him up in her memory as larger than life, and reality was always smaller. You shouldn't be, she said calmly. You invited me. His gaze slid to Minute J, and something in his expression shifted. Calculation. Threat assessment. The realization that this wasn't what he'd expected. Not even close. And you must be? Dominic extended his hand, playing the gracious host. Minute J's voice was silk over steel. Her husband. Silence swallowed the terrace. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. The words hung in the air like a detonation waiting to finish exploding. Dominic's smile thinned. The hand he'd offered hung in the air for one painful second before he let it drop, the rejection noted by everyone watching. I see, Dominic said, his voice tight with forced civility. Congratulations are in order then. Thank you, Alana said. We've been married 2 years. 2 years. The timeline landed like a slap. She'd left Dominic 3 years ago, been married to Minute J for 2. The math told everyone watching that she hadn't spent long mourning her first marriage. That she'd moved on quickly. Decisively. To someone who made Dominic DeLuca look like a small-time player. Dominic's jaw clenched. He looked at Minute J again, and this time there was no mistaking the challenge in his eyes. You're on DeLuca property, he said. A reminder. A threat. Minute J's expression didn't change. And yet, he said calmly, you invited us. The logic was unassailable. Dominic had extended the invitation. They'd accepted. Being upset about their presence now would make him look weak, petty. He'd created this situation. Now he had to live with the consequences. Alana felt it then. The shift in power. The way the crowd's attention had turned from curiosity to assessment. They weren't looking at her with pity anymore. They were looking at her with something else. Respect. Wariness. The beginning of understanding. Dominic leaned closer to her, lowering his voice so only she and Minute J could hear. You think this is protection? He whispered. You're standing between two empires, Alana. That's not safety. That's a crossfire. She smiled faintly. No, she said softly. I'm not standing between them. I'm standing above them. The ceremony bells began ringing inside the house. The wedding was starting. Guests began moving toward the entrance, their conversations hushed and speculative. Dominic had no choice but to step aside, to let them pass. To watch as Alana and Minute J walked into his wedding, into his home, onto his territory, and claimed space like they had every right to it. Because they did. As they entered the ballroom, Alana could feel Dominic's eyes on her back. Could imagine his expression, the fury he was fighting to control, the calculation already spinning in his mind. He wouldn't let this go unanswered. Would be planning his response even as he stood there smiling for his guests. Good, she thought. Let him plan. Let him scheme. She'd spent 3 years afraid of him. Of his anger, his influence, his ability to make her life difficult. But standing here now, Minute J's hand at the small of her back, possessive and claiming and absolutely intentional, she realized something. She wasn't afraid anymore. And that, more than anything else, was going to destroy him. Chapter 5: The Ceremony and the Crossfire. The ballroom was everything Dominic DeLuca wanted the world to see. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls. White roses and gold accents everywhere, on tables, climbing pillars, woven into archways. A string quartet played softly near the altar, where a priest waited with the kind of patient, seen-it-all expression that came from marrying too many Mafia families. Chairs were arranged in neat rows, each one claimed by someone who mattered in Chicago's underworld. Alana recognized faces she'd seen at events with Dominic, capos and their wives, underbosses, the adjacent families who orbited the Italian syndicates like planets around violent suns. They all turned to watch as she and Minute J entered. The whispers were louder now, less restrained. Alana could hear fragments as they walked down the center aisle, Jun and their security trailing at a careful distance. Can't believe she actually came. Married to Kang, did you know? Ballsy or stupid, hard to say. Dominic must be losing his mind. Minute J guided her to seats in the third row. Not front row, that would have been aggressive, an obvious provocation. Not back row, that would have been hiding. Third row was perfect. Visible but not demanding. Present but not presumptuous. Always calculated. Always intentional. As they sat, Alana noticed the seat beside her was occupied by a woman she recognized, Maria Castellano, wife of one of the more powerful capos. Maria had always been kind to her during Dominic's events, one of the few who treated her like a person rather than an accessory. Maria leaned over now, her voice low. You look amazing. And brave. Possibly insane, but amazing. Alana smiled. Thank you. I think. You know everyone's talking, right? I'd be disappointed if they weren't. Maria laughed, a quiet sound quickly stifled. Fair enough. For what it's worth, I'm glad you came. Watching Dominic's face when you walked in? Worth the price of admission. Before Alana could respond, the music shifted. The wedding march began. Everyone stood. Isabella Moretti appeared at the back of the ballroom in a confection of white lace and silk. She was beautiful in the way magazine covers were beautiful. Flawless, expensive, slightly unreal. Barely 25, Alana remembered. A full decade younger than Dominic. She walked down the aisle on her father's arm, Marco Moretti looking every inch the proud patriarch. His eyes swept the crowd as he walked, a subtle reminder that this wedding was about more than romance. It was about power. About alliance. About two families becoming one force. When Isabella reached the altar, Dominic took her hand. To anyone watching, he probably looked like a man in love. Alana could see through the performance. Could see the possessiveness in the way his fingers tightened on Isabella's, the satisfaction in his smile. He'd wanted someone young. Someone he could shape. Someone who wouldn't question or challenge or grow beyond the borders he set. Someone not like Alana. The priest began the ceremony. The words washed over the crowd. Love, honor, cherish. The same promises Dominic had made to her 7 years ago. Promises that had turned to ash. Beside her, Minute J sat perfectly still. Not fidgeting, not reacting. Just present. His hand rested on his knee, close enough that she could take it if she needed to. A reminder that she wasn't enduring this alone. Halfway through the vows, Alana felt eyes on her. She glanced up, found Dominic looking directly at her. Not at his bride. At her. The message was clear: see what you gave up. See what you could have had. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then deliberately, slowly, she reached over and laced her fingers through Minute J's. Felt his hand close around hers, warm and secure. Dominic's jaw tightened. He looked away. Point made. The ceremony concluded with the traditional kiss, applause rippling through the crowd. Isabella and Dominic turned to face their guests, married now, unified. The priest introduced them as Mr. and Mrs. DeLuca, and they walked back down the aisle together. As they passed Alana's row, Isabella's eyes caught on her. There was a flicker of something in that gaze, recognition, maybe, curiosity. Then she was past, swept along on Dominic's arm toward the reception. The crowd began to rise, moving toward the ballroom's far end where tables had been set for dinner. A jazz band was setting up in the corner. Champagne appeared on trays carried by servers, who moved with the careful precision of people who knew better than to spill anything on the wrong person. That went smoothly, Minute J murmured as they stood. Too smoothly, Alana replied. Dominic's planning something. Of course he is. But so am I.